What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce episode 16. This episode was really good. I enjoyed the fact that this episode kind of slowed down the pace from last week's episode where it was definitely a more intense one. But this episode did answer a lot of questions we've been asking about for quite some time, specifically regarding a lot of the Rangers' backstories and just in general started pushing that forward even further, and it was really great to see. So that happened. We also got to see a past Ranger team show up, specifically an evil Ranger team, which is very cool, and also a Ranger that we kind of already knew, but we didn't expect that Ranger to be in this episode, which was kind of nice. So we'll get into that in this episode because believe me, it was a nice sight to see, and there were some great surprises overall. So just in general, I was very happy about it. That past Ranger team was an evil Ranger team, so keep that in mind. Yeah, so that's very cool, and I'm sure those of you that have seen it know exactly which team I'm talking about, of course, but we'll get into it very, very shortly. So this episode starts off with us seeing that the Rangers are on the Hyperforce ship with full health. One thing I wanted to mention up front was that Yoshi was not in the episode for the majority of the episode. He actually came in about, a couple minutes into the last hour of the episode. So, he missed the majority of it, but that's because he was busy and he had to bike there in California traffic, which, if you know California, not so simple. Believe me, not simple at all to deal with California traffic, especially with those crazy lanes of traffic and everything. Oh, don't even ask. Okay, so anyway, moving on, what we do end up seeing in this episode is that Joe is resting. That's their excuse that they make. He's in the medical bay, so he's not in the episode for quite some time. Eventually, the Rangers detect the Alliance ship has traveled to 2 years in the future, and it's on a planet called Y37. Now, Y37, I don't think it's based off of anything. It could be based off of some minor thing in an episode of, in space or something like that, but I personally doubt it. But anyway, it's a really small planet. It's smaller than Earth. Alpha actually explains this later on because they do plan to go down. We do end up seeing this clip where they cut away and it shows the Alliance leader heads down to this small island planet which has a containment facility that holds prisoners in it. And what happens is the leader releases a blast of energy to create a hole to smash into the building and try to get in there. He eventually releases some prisoners, which are the red, the blue, the yellow, the pink, and the green A Squad Rangers. So that's very cool. 2 years into the future, they are in the containment cells that the A Squad Rangers were put in after they were captured for turning evil and, just in general being seen as, guilty in the past. So that's really important to note, and I like the fact that they actually use the A Squad Rangers because, they talked about them in the past two episodes, but it's nice to see them actually using them other than just saying, oh yeah, they're off-world in space somewhere. Now they're actually creating more of a story for them, which was kind of nice. So that is important to note. So what does end up happening is that basically the Alliance leader says, I will let you go and you must work for me. Otherwise, I will imprison you in a worse state that you were already in. So they basically say, okay, we're going to listen to this guy. He seems pretty reliable and we're going to trust him because he's pretty powerful looking. So, that's what happens. So at that point, what happens is from here is that the Rangers then agree to kneel down to the Alliance leader, and they decide to work together. So that all happens. Then from there, the Hyperforce Rangers just end up seeing what's occurring, and they notice that the A Squad is kneeling before the Alliance leader, and they end up learning from Alpha that the A Squad Rangers became evil, and they need to see if they can convert them to the side of good, or at least subdue them since they escaped their prison cells. So that's obviously a very important detail to remember. So what happens is that from here, we end up seeing that the Rangers discuss how they're going to try to break in. Initially, what Vesper decides to do is that she wants to actually blow up the building that they're in, but the thing is that there are other prisoners there, and there are also staff members, so they don't want to destroy innocent civilians, so they have to be very careful of what they're doing. But at the same time, the other Rangers are like, well, why don't we isolate the A Squad leader? And the thing is that they talk about the whole aspect of how typically when it comes to Ranger leaders, in most cases, they're usually the Red Ranger, and the Red Ranger typically gets a lot of focus. So if they take out the leader, then the others will fall most likely. So they basically want to take out A Squad Red Ranger. So that's important. So then from there what happens is that we end up seeing the Rangers planning to go and attack and try to isolate the leader. Vesper ends up making 2 explosives. That's interesting. And those explosives do get used. So we'll get into that later. What ends up happening eventually is that we also end up seeing the blue A Squad leader drags out a security guard out of the watchtower that was watching over all the prisoners. And the other Rangers laugh and are happy that things worked out. So then from there, what ends up happening is that the Rangers end up going to try and hide and be careful and try to sneak into the prison location. They actually do different types of jumps. Everyone manages to get into the general area where the A Squad Rangers are, except for Chloe. And it actually works out pretty well overall, what they end up doing with that. So Chloe actually falls into the water, but in the meantime, the other Rangers end up showing up where the A Squad Rangers are. There's different confrontations that occur between each of the A Squad Rangers and the Hyperforce Rangers that are there. So what we do end up seeing is that the A Squad Rangers see Vesper, because she jumps in first, and what happens is that everyone lands, as I said before, but Chloe in the right spot. So then from there, the Red Ranger looks towards the Hyperforce Rangers, so the Red A Squad Ranger looks at them. And the thing is that the A Squad Rangers all use their weapons against the Hyperforce Rangers. So we end up seeing the A Squad Red Ranger use her, well, it's not really made clear, but, you know, the A Squad Red Ranger was a girl, against Marv. The A Squad Blue Ranger attacks Eddie. The A Squad Yellow Ranger tries to attack, I believe the A Squad Yellow Ranger tries to attack Marv at one point, but there is also a point where, like, Jack tries to taunt the A Squad Yellow Ranger, and what happens is that it doesn't work out also well. The A Squad Pink Ranger also gets ready to attack Vesper. You know, all sorts of different attacks occur. And eventually, the Green Ranger runs, and all the Rangers end up being closed into the containment cell. So basically, the A Squad Rangers end up escaping while the Hyperforce Rangers are stuck inside the containment cell. So eventually, what does end up happening is that they try to talk to the guard that was watching the watchtower and making sure the prisoners wouldn't escape. But the thing is that they end up asking if he has any suggestions to get them out. And the thing is that we also learn the name of the guard, which is Manny. And what we do end up learning is that, like, he has no idea how to really get them out. He can help lock them in when they get there, but when they get them back in, but he can't do much in the current state of things. So what they do end up deciding to do is they learn from Manny that there is a way to escape, which is that there is a elevator near the watchtower that they can use to drop down to where, so that they can drop down to a lower chamber location that will bring them outside of the prison containment cells or whatever. So at that point, they end up taking that suggestion. They initially were going to teleport, but they decided against it, so that's important to note. Eventually, Eddie decides to do something nice for Manny, which, since he's super tired and he was injured and everything, he actually puts him on a small bed cot. Then what ends up happening is that we end up seeing Chloe being told to stall the A Squad Rangers. So she actually does some pretty interesting things. She lands on shore. She ends up using her, her Hurricane Whirlwind attack against the A Squad Rangers. She actually attacks all of them, and they get knocked back. And she also does transform, so that's cool to see as well. So she is like the first one to transform in this episode, and she does the first big attack in the episode. So that all happens. Eventually, the Rangers do come out of the elevator, and Vesper ends up throwing a bomb, one of the two bombs that she has, at the A Squad Red Ranger, which, causes him to get injured. So that's interesting. Then what ends up happening is that the current situation has it where Vesper's doing something, Chloe's on her own, so there's the three others now, Eddie, Jack, and Marv. What we end up seeing is that Eddie wants to initially do a sneak attack against the A Squad Red Ranger, and that kind of does happen, but originally it was going to involve Jack. They end up actually changing it to be Jack and Marv. So what we end up seeing is, no, actually, what am I saying? It was going to be Jack, Marv, and Eddie. What actually happens is that it's Eddie and Marv. That's what happens. So what we end up seeing is that Marv gets to attack from the front, while Eddie tries to do a sneak attack behind the A Squad Red Ranger to, hold him in his grasp and keep him there. Or she, I meant to say. It's very unusual to typically get a female Red, but that's important. And they never really mention it, but in reality, that is what happens. It's just that they never unveil the identities in this episode. So that all happens. Eventually, what we do end up seeing is that the Rangers, they all morph as well, and that's important to remember. Marv tries to make the A Squad Rangers redeem themselves, and eventually there's different attacks that occur. Like, for example, with the bomb, there's a smoke cloud that happens, so that's why they're trying to do the sneak attacks. Initially, what does end up happening is that the Yellow Ranger attacks Eddie, but it misses. But instead it hits the red A Squad Ranger. Then we end up seeing the Green and Pink Ranger try to team up, and the blue tries to run out of the smoke, and eventually it clears. So then following this, Marv and Eddie try to take down and separate the A Squad Red Ranger, and as I said before, he gets hold of the A Squad Red Ranger. Again, I'm doing this a little out of order just because I'm trying to get to different points, so keep that in mind. If it sounds like I'm going back and forth between things, it's just because I'm saying things and there are certain things that I'm reading, because I have to, there's so many things that happen in this episode, and I want to make sure that I cover a lot of them because a lot of things were important overall. So different attacks occur. Eventually, the Blue A Squad Ranger says that they'll never go back into the facility. Jack tries to restrain the Blue A Squad Ranger eventually, which works pretty well. We end up seeing restraint that occurs with the Yellow and Pink A Squad Rangers, which Chloe manages to do, where she actually uses her Hurricane Whirlwind to create a water spout attack that she used in the past to actually knock them over, and she eventually is able to restrain them. That all happens. We end up seeing Eddie, which was really crazy, where Eddie gets really annoyed because Vesper gets hurt at one point by the, I believe it was the Green A Squad Ranger, which leads to the Green A Squad Ranger actually elbowing her when she tries to restrain him. And what happens when Vesper tries to restrain the A Squad Green Ranger. So what ends up happening is that Eddie gets really annoyed and he ends up attacking the A Squad Red Ranger, and Eddie manages to dodge some pretty big attacks against the A Squad Red Ranger. So then eventually what we end up seeing is the SPD Green Ranger appears, and the SPD Green Ranger ends up helping them out by actually using that Ranger's SPD Morpher to do Judgment Time. So the Judgment Time indicator goes up and down, goes from guilty to not guilty over and over again until eventually it says guilty, and each of the 5 A Squad Rangers are then trapped into the SPD cards that imprison them. So what ends up happening is that eventually the SPD Green Ranger reveals their identity, and what's important is that time has happened. So it's not going to be Bridge, which is the one that people would expect if it were, in the 2005 era, but this is 2 years later, meaning that Bridge has already been promoted. So who is it? Well, it's another other than Detective Song, which is cool because, again, it's never made clear as to who actually takes over as the SPD Green Ranger. They just basically promote, Bridge to blue and then to red, but they never actually explain things. Now, again, I'm giving that away. I know some of you may not have seen the actual season, and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling that for you. It's a great season to see. The Red Ranger one is less of a big deal in my opinion, but of course it's still important, and I understand that if some of you haven't seen it, I am sorry, spoilers. I will say that right now, and I'm sorry that I didn't say it earlier, but yes, that is the case. So we do end up seeing Detective Song as the green SPD Ranger, and she did not know that Doggy was a Ranger, so that's important. And so obviously some time has happened. She's very happy to see the Rangers, which is great. Vesper does end up going into the building where the confinement building was, where the security guard was, and she actually tries to sleep next to the security guard. And eventually Eddie and Detective Song end up going in there as well to put the prisoners into their confinement cells, but keep them in their card forms. So what does end up happening in there is that Eddie and Vesper talk. Vesper wants to go home. She feels like there's too much going on, and she just needs some time alone to, figure out things for herself. So following this, what does end up happening is that Eddie tries to comfort her and make her feel like, we need you here, you're important, you're special, we need you to be with us. And eventually the other Rangers go off back to the Hyperforce ship. Then what happens is that Vesper returns back to the ship, and Eddie says his goodbyes to Detective Song, and Eddie returns with the other Hyperforce Rangers onto the ship. So at that point, what ends up happening is that the Rangers end up finding out that they should go back to their own time, because that's what they need to do. Now, what does end up happening here before they jump back to their actual time is that we end up seeing this clip that shows up having to do with the Alliance Leader. Now, one thing that we actually learned is that the Alliance Leader actually stayed in place. When he actually left the A Squad Rangers initially, he stayed where he was, and he was charging his ship so that eventually they could get off of where they were. And the thing is that the Alliance Leader is very surprised that the Hyperforce Rangers knew where they were, but the thing is that eventually he tries to contact Velkanos and Scorpina and the Putties to try and find how they would know. The Putties actually find a small tracker, which he actually destroys, and he also is given by Scorpina Joe's Morpher, which he also destroys. So they have no way of tracking the Alliance ship anymore other than time anomalies, which is important. So that is interesting, and obviously with Joe's Morpher being destroyed, that means that Joe can't morph at all right now. So what will that lead to? We'll have to wait and see, of course. So what does end up happening from here is that the Rangers travel back to their time, the year 3017. Once they arrive there, they're actually greeted by Abigail, which was their classmate from their time in Time Force prior to the incident that happened. And what does end up happening is that, we hadn't seen Abigail quite some time. I mean, we've heard from her, but now we actually have to see her, and that's great. And what happens is that Abigail decides to reward them with something because it was something that they never got to do because they left so early, and that was to give them a very nice present. So they actually go to a grassy field or a picnic area to hand each of the Hyperforce Rangers Time Force badges, which is very cool. So that is nice to note. Each one of them receives it, although Jack, since he already has one technically, he actually receives a pin with a star on it, which is very nice. And so, everyone gets something. Everyone has a little speech that's said by Abigail, which is really, really great. And, just in general, she gushes a lot, which is, it's nice. So then from there, the Rangers discuss the idea that they're going to go and speak to their families. Different characters do different things, obviously. So, for example, Chloe actually doesn't go anywhere. She mostly just ends up talking with Abigail. But at the same time, we also have it where Eddie goes off to talk to Bianca, which is interesting. And Jack and Vesper, for some reason, which is an interesting duo, end up going to talk to Vesper's parents. And Marv ends up going to look for Joe, who Joe is actually being, debriefed because he's been away for so long, and basically no one's known where he really is aside from those that were the higher ups that were keeping it secret this whole time. So that's important. So then from there, what ends up happening is that we start off with us seeing the story about Vesper. Now, Vesper, of course, is super important. We've been wondering for quite some time about her robotic history, who are her parents, how is she made, and all that kind of stuff. Well, this episode definitely gives a good job at answering that. And what we end up seeing is that Vesper and Jack end up going to Vesper's home. Vesper has a mother and a father. Their names are Antonio and Luce or Laus, I think it is. And what happens is that her parents are both doctors. They worked on robotic technology. They ended up working in all sorts of different sciences. When she returns home, her parents give her a hug, and they're so joyous and happy to see her, and they love her. They truly do care for her. So that's a great thing to see. Eventually, Vesper does explain that she does know who she is, and Jack also tries to help out with that. Eventually, her parents explain the fact that, how she was made and how she was born and all that, which was the idea that when her parents were graduate students in college, what happened is that they were working on robotic experiments for Dr. What's his name again? I just forgot his name right now. Dr. Ferrix? Dr. Ferrix, which, if you know who that is, I don't want to say it right now because it makes sense at the end, and I'm sure some of you will recognize the image that I'll probably put up already of who that is, Dr. Ferrix or whatever. And is that how Ferrix, right? So what does end up happening is that they explained that Dr. Ferrix was the one that they were working under. They were working on some cyclobots, which is important because the cyclobots are the main, villains from the putties for Time Force, basically. So that's important, obviously. And the thing is that he was working with them. Eventually, the lab that he was working in got exploded and was destroyed, which led to, that being the only thing that Vesper actually knew about Dr. Ferrix. And she had been informed about him in the past, he had been brought up and she knew about the building being destroyed, but she didn't know that, him, Dr. Ferrix and Vesper were connected in any way. Well, what we end up seeing is that Dr. Ferrix apparently was in this building that got destroyed. Eventually, the two graduate students, being her parents, ended up hearing the explosion. They ended up returning to the lab where they ended up seeing a small version of Vesper sitting there, and what they end up doing is they end up bringing Vesper back to their homes. So they have to raise her and, so on and so forth. So that all happens. Now, the big question is, of course, is who was the one that destroyed Dr. Ferrix and what happened to him exactly? Was he killed? What exactly occurred, and who is he? You have to wonder, because that's the initial thought. Is he dead? What's going on with him? Who destroyed the lab and all that kind of stuff? So they obviously want to go and find out that whole situation. So then it switches to a changing of perspective. I also wanted to mention is that she constantly brings up the point that she really is not sure if she can forgive her parents for everything that happened, and the fact that her parents weren't willing to tell her the truth about herself. She feels like she's always been seen as this special person, but she didn't realize that her whole background, and she feels like she deserved to know the truth about herself, and she's not sure if she will ever come back. We do also have a dog that Vesper has, which is called Yappy, and Yappy is a nice dog, but Jack does not like dogs because he had experiences with a gerbil that actually bit him. So that all happens. Finally, moving on to the next story, we end up seeing the story with Eddie and Bianca, which is interesting. Eddie and Bianca, if you remember, are the two that originally were meant to marry because of family situations and most likely arranged marriages. Apparently, they both were working on different businesses and they were going to work together on a business, which is interesting. And there's this whole idea of, Eddie being a ranger now and how he wants to pursue his ranger thing while Bianca continues to work as a business person and continue to progress in business. The thing is that he never mentioned specifically about his relationship situation with Vesper, but he does mention all of his friends and, his experiences as a ranger and the alliance leader and all that kind of stuff. So all that is definitely brought up. I think I'm actually doing this out of order. Yes, I believe that actually there was another point that was brought up before this. But yes, so all that occurs. Eddie and Bianca do agree to be friends. The thing that I forgot to mention, which was the second story, this is actually the third story, was Chloe and Abigail. So what actually happens is that Chloe and Abigail are taking pictures, they're hanging out, they're having a good time, and eventually Chloe mentions about how initially when, the day that she became a Hyperforce Ranger and all that, what happened was that she was doing some work looking through some evidence trying to find out information about her parents, because her parents were presumed dead but their bodies were never found. And so what happens is that there was a box that actually had the files on it, but she never got to it. So the thing is that Abigail asked, do you know where that box is? And she says, well, it probably was put out somewhere. And the thing is that what they believe that happened was that it may have been moved into the Alliance files. So what actually happens is that Abigail says is that while she's trying to help them, deal with the Alliance leader, she's also going to try and find the files on Chloe's parents. So that's nice to see. One thing I forgot to also mention was that the Alliance ships were... The Alliance leader was not the only figure to actually get a ship. And same with the Hyperforce Rangers. There was other ships that were stolen. We don't know about them yet, but obviously those will be very interesting to see when we do get to learn more about them. So I wanted to just bring that up because I know that was a point that was brought up, and I'm sure I'll ask a question about that in the comments. So anyway, all that happens, we do end up seeing Marv and Joe eventually. Marv and Joe do end up confronting each other, and this happens at a good timing. They come in pretty much right around the time that they need to. So that whole conversation occurs with Marv and Joe basically forgiving each other, explaining the situation, basically just saying that he's been on a mission for... It was meant to be a year, but it actually lasted quite longer. He lost his commanding officer, and he was basically just trying to arise through the ranks, and didn't expect that his mission would get as serious as it did, and everything that occurred at the end. So that's important. Now, what we do end up seeing is that they end up returning back to their homes. So Marv and Joe end up returning to their homes. They get to say hi to their parents. They are happy to see their children, especially Joe. I don't know what just happened right there. But anyway, what does end up happening is that they talk to their parents, they get the chance to speak to them, and the parents are just so happy. They don't want them to leave, but the thing is that they have to go on their mission. So all this happens. Then from there, all the Rangers decide to go and meet up because Vesper contacts them all saying that I think we need to go to where I was born, or where I was made, which was Dr. Ferrix's lab, or at least that's where I was found. So they end up going to Dr. Ferrix's lab, all 6 of them. And what happens is that when they arrive there, they're met by this small child. And the thing is that the child is very quiet, and Vesper actually takes her dog with her, Yappy. So now they have this dog named Yappy, and what happens is that the boy ends up running into the building with the dog. The boy actually falls over and trips over himself, and then what happens is that they're trying to ask the boy questions, but eventually we end up meeting the brother of the boy, which his name is Spencer, and the boy is named Josh. So what happens is that they're brothers, and what we do end up learning is that Vesper is their sister. They're all part of a family, and there are other ones as well. There are like 4 in total, I believe there are, and Dr. Ferrix is basically their father. So that's important to know, that we actually know that. What we also learn is that they've been living there for the past 17 years, so that's important. And Dr. Ferrix reprogrammed them and made them who they are. And also Dr. Ferrix was made with robotic parts. And what we do end up learning is that basically Dr. Ferrix is Frax. So that's really awesome. And I really, really love that. We also learned that the one that destroyed the lab was who? Of course, Ramsick. So that's basically where the episode ends. people in this episode were actually suspecting that we might have a Jack Spur situation, which means that Jack and Vesper kind of a thing. That was interesting. But I'm really happy that Vesper supposedly actually might have come from Frax's creative mind. I really like that, especially since they bring up the whole aspect of how Dr. Ferrix really valued humans, mutants, and robot the same, and really just wanted to have everyone seen the same way. I really like that whole aspect, and I think that, you know, that really fits Vesper's character in a lot of ways, just in general. So that's really awesome. I definitely want to learn more about that. I'm very curious if like when this would be, most likely because of certain things that were confirmed later on, such as in the fireside chat. It was kind of confirmed that this is after Rancic has turned good, which makes sense because this is the year 2017, and when he turned good, he was brought back to the year like 2001 most likely. So keep that in mind, that obviously with that much time going on, he has to be good now. But that's awesome, and you know, just in general, I mean, Rancic's a really cool character, and Frax is like such an awesome general that for the season. So I am so happy to see that Frax is actually involved in this. I mean, I love Frax, so that's great. So keep that in mind. Yes, we finally know who Vesper's creator is, and I think that that's such a smart thing to do. I was glad that they actually chose Frax out of all the characters, and I think that he is just so fitting. He's so fitting. So keep that in mind. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Again, another long video because a lot of stuff happens in these episodes, so, you know, you never know with each episode what they're doing. I also wonder what those other ships were, like who stole those. Were those other Rangers? Were those other villains? Will those ships end up meeting up with the Rangers and actually joining on their side? Will they be enemies? You know, how will that whole thing work? I definitely want to know more. And I'm also very curious to see what we'll end up discovering from here, because next episode we may end up having a situation where the Rangers get to meet Rancic, which would be really cool to see, because Rancic's like one of my favorite villains like ever in the Power Rangers franchise. So, you know, I'm not going to complain either way. I mean, he's probably either my favorite or like in my top 3 or top 2 easily. So keep that in mind. Very cool. Definitely looking forward to seeing all that. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.